You know, it usually happens right around 7 a.m.
Oh, yeah, the morning rush.
Right. You wake up, you reach for your phone,
Yeah,
and honestly, before your feet even hit the floor, you just start mentally putting it on.
putting the armor on.
Exactly. You draft a work email in your head, tweaking the tone so you sound, assertive but not aggressive.
Right, right.
You rehearse a conversation with a friend to make sure you come across as perfectly supportive. And by the time you actually walk out your front door or log into your first meeting, you are just entirely weighed down by the heavy invisible armor of other people's expectations.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It totally is. So today, welcome to the deep dive, because we are exploring a deeply counterintuitive, honestly life-changing philosophical mission.
I love this topic.
We want to figure out why true confidence, genuine happiness, and actual success only seem to arrive when you stop trying so unbelievably hard to control everything.
Because that morning routine you just described, it's so universal. I mean, we armor up because we think it protects us from judgment, right?
Yeah, we think it keeps us safe.
We operate under this assumption that if we can just, micromanage how everyone perceives us, we will finally be secure. But the irony is that this obsession with control is precisely what makes every single movement in our lives take 10 times more effort.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because what's fascinating when you dig into the mechanics of this,
Hmm.
and we're going to trace this from the 16th century wisdom of Michel de Montaigne straight through to modern clinical psychology, is that most of the expectations we feel trapped by aren't even our own.
No, not at all. They are completely externally imposed.
Right. To step away from the armor analogy for a second, it's um, it's much closer to booting up a computer and having 80 heavy background applications launch automatically at startup.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to put it.
You have an application running for what my boss thinks, one for how my relationship looks on social media, and another for avoiding criticism from my parents.
And that framing is just incredibly accurate from a cognitive science perspective. When you have that many background applications running, your primary task, which is simply living your life and making authentic decisions, lags and crashes.
Yeah, the whole system just freezes up.
Exactly. Your cognitive bandwidth is entirely consumed by what psychologists call an external locus of control. You are basically living in a chronic state of low-grade threat detection.
Constantly scanning the room.
Right, constantly scanning your environment to see how you are being perceived by everyone else.
Because fundamentally, we are terrified of rejection. So we preemptively reject our own natural instincts just to avoid the tribe doing it to us.
What's fascinating here is that this is the core defense mechanism for humans.
Right.
I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint, being rejected by the tribe meant literal death.
You'd be left out in the cold.
Literally.
Yeah.
So modern humans have adapted this obsession over perfectionism not as a true sign of ambition, but as a shield.
Like we're hiding behind it.
Exactly. We subconsciously calculate, if I am perfectly in control, if I meet every single expectation anyone could ever possibly have, then no one can criticize me.
Wow.
But the tragedy is that this defense mechanism outsources your self-worth to a crowd of people who are, frankly, too busy managing their own cognitive overload to accurately judge yours.
That is such a huge point. And this constant, exhausting hypervigilance is the exact psychological trap Michel de Montaigne was trying to escape back in the 1500s.
Yeah, way ahead of his time.
Reading his essays today, he sounds less like an ancient philosopher and more like someone diagnosing the modern condition. I mean, he lived during a time of intense political and religious turmoil in France, yet his entire philosophy was centered on turning inward.
Which is so counterintuitive during a crisis.
Right. He had this realization that releasing these unnecessary burdens, shifting to an internal locus of control, and actually getting comfortable with his own flawed human nature was the only way to let life fall into place.
Because Montaigne recognized that the public stage is a trap, he realized that the more you try to perform for the crowd, the more you lose the plot of your own life.
You forget who you even are.
Exactly. And modern psychology completely aligns with this centuries-old idea. The shift toward an internal locus of control means recognizing that your fundamental well-being just isn't tied to the unpredictable whims of other people's opinions.
But, I have to push back here for a second because this is where the concept of letting go gets very slippery for people.
Oh, for sure.
If I just stop caring about what my boss thinks or what my partner expects, don't I just become completely lazy or apathetic? I mean, doesn't society fundamentally fall apart if we're all just wandering around indifferent to our responsibilities?
This raises an important question, and it is
No.
honestly the single most common and most dangerous misunderstanding of this entire philosophy.
Okay, lay it on me.
We have to draw a very hard line between two vastly different psychological states, detachment and indifference.
They sound some.
They might look similar to an untrained observer, yes, but the internal engine driving them is completely different.
So break down that internal engine for us. Because to a lot of people, not caring sounds exactly like apathy.
Right. Well, indifference is a lack of feeling or action. It's rooted in learned helplessness or a downregulation of dopamine. It is basically saying, I don't care if the house burns down, I'm not going to try to put out the fire.
Yeah, that's just destructive.
It is entirely destructive. Detachment, on the other hand, in Montaigne's view and in modern clinical practice, is something else entirely. Detachment is releasing the obsession over the outcome while maintaining deep engagement with the process.
Okay, wait, say more about that.
It means you let go of the need for the applause.
Oh, wow. That reframes the entire concept. It isn't refusing to build the house. It's building the absolute best house you possibly can, with intense focus and craftsmanship, but accepting that if a storm comes and knocks it down, or if the neighbor hates the paint color, it doesn't destroy your internal foundation.
That is a perfect analogy. And that separation of process and outcome actually changes your entire neurobiology.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. When you are no longer burning 80% of your cognitive RAM worrying about the crowd's reaction, you have significantly more energy to dedicate to the actual task. You become far more competent, creative, and resilient when you aren't paralyzed by the fear of a negative outcome.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This naturally bridges into Carl Jung's psychological frameworks. We are jumping from the 1500s straight into the 20th century, but the mechanism is literally identical.
It really is.
Jung posited that everything you truly want comes when you let go, specifically through what he called shadow work. He argued that we all have hidden parts of ourselves, flaws, eccentricities, dark desires that just don't fit into that polished, perfectly controlled persona we want to present to the world.
And suppressing that shadow requires immense psychological force.
Like holding a beach ball underwater.
Exactly like that. It's the mental equivalent of trying to hold a fully inflated beach ball underwater indefinitely. It takes constant, exhausting effort. Jung argued that when you finally let go, when you stop caring about presenting a flawless, sanitized facade, the shadow integrates into your personality.
You stop fighting yourself.
Right. You become a whole, congruent human being, and wholeness completely eliminates the neurotic need for external validation.
He also applied this dynamic to how we view others, specifically calling out the danger of romanticizing people, which I think is so relevant today.
Oh, incredibly relevant.
When we romanticize a boss, a partner, or a social circle, we are actually engaging in a subtle form of control. We are pasting our own idealized expectations onto them, trying to force them into a specific role so they can fulfill our unresolved needs.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is a brilliant point. You stop interacting with the complex, flawed human being standing in front of you, and instead you interact with a fantasy.
A completely made-up version of them.
Exactly. And letting go of that romanticization is painful initially because the fantasy is a comforting shield against the unpredictability of real relationships. But dropping that illusion of control is the only psychological mechanism that allows for genuine intimacy and connection.
I mean, it makes so much sense. I like to think of it like trying to catch a butterfly. If you wildly chase it, trying to control it and grab it, it just flees.
Yeah, it flies away every time.
But if you sit still and just focus on your own presence, that detachment and silence, it lands right on your shoulder.
That is a beautiful way to picture it.
And the same thread of focusing on your own locus of control and staying silent on the rest is the bedrock of Stoicism. The Stoics were absolute masters of the art of not caring.
They really mastered separating the process from the outcome.
Yeah, and there is this modern, somewhat mystical phrase people use on social media to describe this state, vibrating higher. People say that when you let go, you vibrate higher. Yeah. But stripping away the mysticism, there's actually hard science behind why stepping back makes you more magnetic, right?
There absolutely is. We can ground vibrating higher directly in Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory and the concept of neuroception.
Okay, walk us through that.
So humans are biologically hardwired to subconsciously scan each other for signs of safety or threat.
That's the neuroception part.
Right. When you walk into a room desperately needing everyone to like you, your nervous system is dysregulated. You emit microexpressions of anxiety, slight pupil dilation, changes in vocal tone, rigid body language.
And people pick up on that.
Intuitively, yes, people detect that desperation, that grasping, and it registers in their brain as a subtle threat or a deficit.
Wow. They can essentially smell the cognitive load you're carrying.
Precisely. But when you walk in completely detached from their judgment, comfortable in your own shadow and imperfections, your autonomic nervous system is settled, you project safety.
And people are drawn to that.
They are naturally, biologically drawn to a regulated nervous system. That is what it actually means to vibrate higher.
But, okay, it is very easy to have a settled nervous system when you are alone in your living room or reading a philosophy book.
Very true.
So what does this all mean when we apply it to the real world? Let's talk about the paradox of power and goodness, because it is one thing to be detached in theory and entirely another when you are actively being provoked.
Yes, the real-world application is where it gets tough.
Friedrich Nietzsche wrote extensively about the power of outsmarting anyone without saying a single word. How does that actually work?
Well, Nietzsche understood the mechanics of power dynamics perfectly. When someone attacks you verbally or tries to provoke a conflict, they are not just throwing words, they are throwing a psychological hook.
And they need you to bite.
Exactly. They are entirely dependent on you biting that hook. The aggressor needs your emotional reaction to validate their attack and to establish a dynamic where they are the ones pulling your strings.
Okay, let's apply this to a highly stressful scenario. Say you are in a Tuesday morning meeting and a colleague blatantly throws you under the bus in front of the entire department.
The classic workplace nightmare.
Right. If I practice this niche non-reaction, if I just sit there and don't defend myself, how does that not make me an absolute pushover? I mean, I'd feel like a doormat.
Because a pushover is operating out of fear. A pushover wants to defend themselves, but is too afraid of the conflict, so they freeze. That is still an outcome-dependent state.
Oh, I see the distinction.
Yeah, Nietzsche non-reaction, on the other hand, is an active, conscious refusal to engage with the problem on the attacker's emotional terms. By dropping the desperate need to immediately control how that aggressive colleague is perceiving you, you remove all of the friction they need to strike the match.
But I have to challenge that, because there is an audience in this meeting. If I stay completely silent while being attacked, doesn't the rest of the room assume I have just admitted defeat?
Well,
doesn't the aggressor win the optics?
that assumes the rest of the room is evaluating the situation based purely on whoever is speaking the loudest. But let's look at the group psychology of that moment.
Okay.
When an aggressor attacks, they are dysregulated. They are projecting chaos. If you react defensively, you enter their chaos, and the room sees two dysregulated people fighting for dominance.
Which just looks messy.
Exactly. But if you hold absolute detached silence, the dynamic shifts entirely.
The contrast becomes glaring.
It creates a vacuum. Without your defensive reaction to distract them, the room's attention is forced entirely onto the unprovoked aggression of the attacker. The silence amplifies their lack of control.
Wow. So by doing nothing, you're actually doing everything.
Yes. You don't look defeated, you look untouchable. The group will always subconsciously gravitate toward the most regulated nervous system in the room. You outsmart the conflict because you didn't let it destabilize your internal state. You can address the factual issue later, calmly, completely stripping the emotion from the interaction.
You win the game by refusing to acknowledge the board. That is so powerful. Which brings us to perhaps the most insidious trap of all, and one of the most fascinating philosophical concepts we're exploring today. Dostoevsky's paradox of the good person.
Yes, this one is deep.
We tend to think of morality and goodness as, like, pure. But Dostoevsky warned that trying too hard to be perceived as perfectly good actively corrupts the intention of goodness itself.
Dostoevsky was brilliant at dissecting human hypocrisy. He showed that when morality becomes an ego management project, it turns toxic.
Because it's not about the other person anymore.
Exactly. Think about the transactional nature of performative goodness. If you do a charitable act or bend over backward to help a friend, but your primary subconscious motivation is to secure the identity of being a good person, to get the external validation and the applause, your goodness is conditional.
You are secretly expecting a return on your investment.
You are.
And if that friend doesn't offer the exact level of immense gratitude you feel you are owed, the immediate result is resentment.
And resentment is the absolute antithesis of goodness. It proves the act wasn't about helping them, it was about validating you.
That is a tough pill to swallow.
It is, But when you apply Montaigne's philosophy of detachment to morality, when you completely let go of the need to be seen as good, it allows for genuine, untainted action. You do the right thing simply because your internal locus of control dictates that it is the right thing to do. The action itself is the only reward you require.
This all really culminates in a modern psychological concept that, honestly, at first glance sounds incredibly naive. The practice of acting as if everything always works out.
It sounds like toxic positivity at first.
Right. But when you understand the mechanics of cognitive load and detachment, it isn't delusional at all. It is a profound cognitive reframing.
It is the ultimate application of everything we've discussed today. When you act as if everything always works out, you are radically accepting the present moment.
You're putting down the armor.
Yes.
Yeah.
You are intentionally closing those 80 background applications of forward-looking anxiety that constantly try to micromanage the future. You shift your trust away from controlling external events and place it entirely on your own internal capacity to handle whatever happens.
Because you finally realize you don't need the external validation to survive the outcome. You no longer need the heavy armor.
And paradoxically, when you operate from that deeply grounded assumption that regardless of the external outcome, your internal foundation is secure, you make remarkably better decisions.
Because you aren't operating out of fear anymore.
Exactly. You take creative risks because failure isn't an existential threat. You speak honestly because you aren't tone policing yourself for the crowd. You stop grasping. And because you are acting with such clarity, focus, and neurological regulation, things very often do work out significantly better than when you are frantically trying to force them.
Wow. The journey we've taken today completely flips our standard operating procedure on its head. I mean, we started by recognizing the sheer exhaustion of waking up and immediately loading our minds with the heavy, borrowed expectations of everyone around us.
The 7 a.m. armor.
The 7 a.m. armor. We explored Montaigne's liberating realization that stepping away from the crowd and focusing inward isn't apathy. It is the ultimate form of agency. It is caring fiercely about the work while entirely releasing the outcome.
And we trace that exact same psychological mechanism through Carl Jung's insistence on integrating our hidden flaws, through the stoic mastery of internal control, all the way to the undeniable power of a regulated nervous system in the face of conflict.
The through line is just incredible.
The universal truth across centuries of human thought is so consistent. Stepping back and releasing your desperate grip on reality is the only actual way to move forward.
The goal today was to give you, the listener, the psychological permission to drop the exhausting pursuit of perfect control. Because when you finally close all those background applications and stop wearing society's heavy armor, your day-to-day life is going to flow with an entirely new level of ease and power.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, there's one final lingering question I really want you to consider.
Let's hear it.
We have established through centuries of philosophy and decades of clinical psychology that you only get what you truly want by letting go of your grip. So what is the one specific outcome you are desperately clinging to right now that you need to drop today to finally let it fall into place?
That is a powerful thought to end on. Think about which piece of armor you can leave on the floor tomorrow morning. Until next time, keep diving deep.